We are joined by our director Eva Hussein, and our guest for this week is Hazara Lianag. Hazara will be taking an in-depth look on how to work effectively with diverse communities in a post-pandemic world. If you like to learn more about the work, about how to work with diverse communities, subscribe to our YouTube channel where we upload videos weekly. Over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and welcome back. I know you haven't been behind the scenes in a while. That is because Hazara has been doing all the live videos. So what's it like, Hazara, to be on the other side of the camera? And good morning to you.
Good morning to everyone as well. It's pretty exciting, being behind the scenes. You get to watch people be interviewed and talk about things that they're passionate about. And there's always a little part of you that's like, I want to be in front of the screen too and explain my part. And
Right.
I'm just eager to be here.
So here's your chance. So I know that you've prepared a few points about how to engage with communities. But firstly, I did want to ask you about you, because we've been working together for about 2 months, and that's been such an interesting journey for me personally and professionally. And, you've enriched the Polaron team with your bright spark. You certainly have a lot of enthusiasm, but tell me a little bit more about your background, because your background is, first of all, science and then marketing. Like, what's that about?
Yeah, so I come from quite a diverse background in both senses of the word. In terms of education, I did come from a science background. I actually wanted to work in healthcare originally, but somewhere along the line, I just wanted to do something a bit more creative and a bit more communication based. So after I finished my science degree, I actually pursued a marketing degree. And I feel like that's where I found a good balance between what I was passionate for and how I wanted to communicate that passion. So that's how I ended up in this particular role as well, especially right after I finished my degree, I was hired, and yeah, things are good.
Yeah, and we're loving it for sure. And Hazara, you mentioned diversity. What does that mean to you?
To me,
Yeah.
diversity really encapsulates the unique stories that people have and the history of like where they came from, who they are as a person. And I think the word is quite broad as well, to be honest. So it's kind of a contextual thing as well. So in the literal sense, I think most people refer to it as a differences between nationalities, cultural identities, but it can also mean just how you express yourself and how you go about things in a day-to-day life, So it's quite a broad term, and it's really personal. I think it's interpretation sometimes.
Right. And I think when we talk about CALD, which is an acronym that is used by a lot of, sort of governments, and it stands for culturally and linguistically diverse, people such as yourself or me, for that matter, we don't automatically think of ourselves as diverse. We're just humans, we're just people, right? But how does that, firstly, did you know about this term before you started, or is that something you've kind of been introduced as you rolled out your job at Polaron?
I would say it's something that I knew existed, but I didn't quite understand the definition of it. And the definition does change over time. And I think the way people interpret it has also changed. But from my understanding, culturally and linguistically diverse relates to people who are living in Australia who may have been born overseas or have a parent or grandparent who were born overseas. So there are a lot of people who fit under that category. I myself fit under that category because both my parents are from overseas, and Eva came here quite a few years ago from Poland. So she also fits into that category. And I think people realize there's a lot more CALD community members than you may have initially thought. And so I think it's really important to understand where exactly we're coming from when we refer to the word CALD.
Yeah. And of course, you and I don't walk around with this label on our foreheads thinking of ourselves as CALD, because it, as I said, we're just people. But it also excludes a few groups that people might not be aware of. So it excludes Indigenous Australians. It excludes Anglo-Celtic, Anglo-Saxon background people. So it's really, who knows what it actually means is what I say. But it just indicates people that may be different, I guess, or may have special needs in terms of communication and language. And that is what we're going to be talking about today. So as you're on this pretty steep learning curve at Polaron, what is it that you can tell our audience, and it's mostly people that want to know, how to engage with communities. What is it that you can tell us on how to do it and do it well?
Yes, I have a couple of tips on how we can go about creating resources and just information for CALD community members. I think there's a lot of different factors you have to kind of take into consideration. And I think the biggest factor is the fact that I read somewhere that close to half of all Victorians were born overseas, or at least had one parent born overseas. And that number is continuing to increase as well. So that's more and more people that we have to reach in this sense. And another interesting fact was that about a quarter of Australians speak a language other than English at home. So even within our own family dynamics, we don't always speak English. So I think it's really important to understand how we can communicate even with each other in a very understanding way. And in terms of practical tips, I have a few ready to go. My first tip would be that a lot of organizations will put together a resource and it's perfect. It's really relevant. It's exactly what people need, but it's all done in English. And then the translation is kind of thought of after. It's not that they don't care about CALD community members. It's not that it's not important to them. It's just naturally that's kind of how we go about things here in Australia. We speak English in the workplace. It's the predominant language here. And I think it's really important when you're creating a resource to maybe see it from that perspective of who's going to be looking at the resource at the end. And in terms of creating that source text, you want to kind of avoid using jargon or complex terminology, because when it comes to translating, explaining things such as jargon can be really confusing because you might have to put extra words in there, or there may not be a semantic equivalent in another language. And I think it'll just be easier for organizations in the long run if they kind of approach it from that sense, understanding that eventually this will be translated into something other than English, or maybe translated into easy English as well, which is becoming quite common as well. Yeah. So I think that's my first tip, just making sure your initial resource is something that can be kind of expanded upon and rearranged depending on the situation.
Of course, you're absolutely right that translations often last thing on people's list when they think of creating resources. But I always think of myself as the 18-year-old that I came here with not one word of English, not really understanding the system. So I think the other thing I would say, just to resonate or confirm what you've just said, is this, that when people think of resources, think of that 18-year-old Eva that's sitting there at home, not really understanding. And it's not always about the language, it's also about the concepts that we're trying to explain. And so therefore rewriting things into plain English does maximize your reach, because if there's someone there that may speak English, basic on a sort of everyday basis, but might struggle with complex terminology or something like that, it's a really good way of reaching to people. What's your second tip, Hazara?
Another tip I have is avoiding assumptions and stereotypes about multicultural communities. I think it can be really easy just because maybe you know someone from that community, or you have a friend or a colleague. You can kind of assume that you know everything about them, but that's really not the case all of the times. And it's not that you don't care. It's not that you just don't understand. It's just better to be sure, I think. And one of the easiest ways you can do that is just going to reliable sources for information. So even here, we have this thing called co-design, where we actually ask community members and community groups what they want in a resource and what works for their community. And I think sometimes if you just actively listen to communities and what they need, then you'll find that it's a lot easier to come up with a resource that can actually be useful to them. So that's probably my next biggest tip for everyone.
Yeah, I love that. And, people do make assumptions. They make assumptions based on how people look, their surnames, which is something we talked about before we came online. So when you look at my surname, and, I've presented at conferences where I've said that when I'm 97 and in a aged care home, they're going to bring me, halal food, play me Middle Eastern music, and they're going to get me an Arabic interpreter. I can guarantee that. So when I see in the next 50 years, we can confirm that. But it's really about looking at a person that you want to talk to. And I think what you described there, Hazara, as a co-design, what we call co-design, is to go out to the community and actually ask them, who are you? What do you know? What do you not know? If that's an expression. How do you communicate? What are communication channels? Is it better to give you a translation on paper? Is it better to send you a text message? Is it better to go out to your community and present about what we as an organization do, if it's for someone that's in the health space? So I think you're absolutely right that we shouldn't just have like a cookie cutter approach to everything that we do, because it just doesn't work, right?
And yeah, just to add on to that, the thing is, the CALD communities are quite diverse in itself. Not every community is the same. So you have to understand that as well, the nuances behind all that. So some communities may prefer physical stuff. Some communities may prefer verbal stuff as well. So I think that's also a really important thing I should mention. Sometimes it may be easier just to verbally explain what you're trying to present to someone instead of handing over a written resource, because low literacy rates, access to certain things can also play a big factor in how your message is delivered. And
Right.
yeah, so it's just really looking at the big picture in some sense.
Right. And I hope you don't mind me asking about your own background, because you mentioned that
Correct.
earlier. So your family's Sri Lankan, is that right?
Yes, we're Sri Lankan.
Okay. So if you look at, let's say, a country of birth for Sri Lankans, you could assume that everybody speaks the same language, everybody looks the same, everybody eats the same food, but it's of course not true. Tell us more about the community your parents come from.
Yeah, so in Sri Lanka, we speak multiple different dialects, and I think the two that most people are familiar with are Sinhalese and Tamil. So my parents come from the Sinhalese community, and another thing I should mention is that religion also plays a massive role in our country, and all these factors kind of intertwine and kind of really play a massive role in how information is presented and delivered. And so my parents are traditionally Buddhist as well. And it's definitely something they've carried over since coming to Australia in the 90s. And the way that they still process information is very much the same as it was back when they were in Sri Lanka. Even though we've come to Australia, they still prefer how things were done the old way, and it's just what they were used to. So I think that's another thing you have to consider when trying to communicate with audiences. Sometimes, as much as they want to assimilate here, they just prefer to do things the way that they always knew how to. So with my parents, I know for a fact they prefer physical resources over anything electronic.
Okay.
Even now, they still get their bills sent to them through the mail because they just don't trust it if it's not in their hands. And so my parents are very much still, they speak Sinhalese at home. They taught us Sinhalese as well. I'm quite fluent, actually. I would say it was my first language before English. And it's definitely played a large role in how I've processed things while living here in Australia.
So interesting, Hazara. So a couple of weeks ago, I think you helped us interview Stephen, who's Greek Australian / Australian Greek. And that's a question I asked him. I said to him, Stephen, are you Greek Australian? Are you Australian Greek? And he had to think about it. What are you? Like, or does it even matter? Like, what do you think of yourself as your own identity in terms of diversity, really, in that context?
Yeah, it's definitely something I've struggled with in the past. Growing up, you kind of wanted to identify more as Australian just so you fit in with everyone else in like school and in primary school. But then the older you get, the more you start to appreciate like the background that you came from and, your parents' histories, especially as you grow, you learn more about their languages and their culture. And then you kind of become proud of where you came from. And right now I would say I'm more Sri Lankan Australia than Australian Sri Lankan, especially since working at Polar and Language Services. It's made me really appreciate how important language is. And part of me is also like kicking myself because I'm still quite terrible at reading Sinhalese and I'm not the best at understanding very complex terminology. And I'm like, I wish I'd paid attention more when I was younger, but I was too busy trying to be Australian that didn't quite translate over. So yeah, it's definitely a changing thing.
The good thing about Australia, of course, is that you can do both. And really, it's a wonderful country when it comes to, not just integration, but living alongside people from all kinds of backgrounds. There's about 300 languages that we speak here. And, like when you went to school, there were people from all kinds of walks of life. Hazara, going back to your points, what's your third point? What's another thing that organizations can do to engage people better?
I think my third point was just your dissemination strategy, how you go about delivering that message. I think that plays a massive role in how it's interpreted, because as much as we want to make things easy for us, it's also important to consider what's better for us in the long run. It's important to have things translated, but if people can't access it, what's the point then? You're spending all this money creating the perfect message, but if people can't access it, then it's pointless. So I think it's really important to be proactive about how you deliver your message. Just really go out there, really speak to the members who you're trying to reach, and just figure out what works for them and ask them, like, what would you like us to do? Because if you're not proactive, people aren't going to receive the message. People aren't always actively looking for information. Sometimes you'll literally have to hand it to them, and that's the best way to ensure that your message is getting through to people.
And of course, what you're talking about is much, much harder than sitting at your computer, writing something in English, translating it and ticking a few boxes, right? So how do you encourage people to actually have that sort of approach? Because I think in your work with us, you've already noticed that some clients are a bit anxious about it. You know, everybody wants to do the right thing, by the way. I don't think there are many evil sort of people that are sitting there thinking, no, we shouldn't translate, we shouldn't communicate. Everybody wants that, and that's built into people's funding. Sometimes it's an obligation in terms of, governmental response to things like crisis or whatever. But what would you say, what should people do when they feel overwhelmed, or they think, oh, that's just too much? Like, how can I go to every single language, every single community? Where do you start?
Well, I think it's important to have a look at your target audience, have a look at the communities that you resonate the most with, and really focus on delivering them with a good message and seeing what works for them. And then you can kind of think about expanding to maybe other audiences and other communities. I think once you understand how to communicate with a certain type of people, you can really kind of figure out what works for you and what doesn't. And I think it's important to also realize that collecting data on the audience that you're trying to reach is probably the best way to go about things. Figure out what they like, what really identifies with them. And I think one of the easiest ways you can do that is in your spare time. Attend festivals. We have a lot of multicultural initiatives here in Victoria, which is very exciting. Even our forum kind of fits under that category. And if you go to places like that, it's a really great place to get some resources and understand how to go about things. And of course, there's the other option of working with us. Polaris, we're actually pretty great when it comes to connecting you with multiple different communities. It's something we specialize in. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of options, and it really just depends on what you're looking for and where your priorities lie.
Yeah, but the best thing to do is just start small. Yeah. If you are anxious about doing the right thing, do something little and see how that works, see how that unravels, or how you can roll it out. And you can certainly rely on us, that's for sure. But the small steps are very important. So when I first entered this space, Sarah, there used to be publications which we luckily no longer produce, like what do Polish people, or what do Russians, what do they do for Christmas or whatever it is. And it used to really annoy me because I don't celebrate Christmas, right? For example. So don't assume, as you said earlier, certain things, but rather go out to the community and ask. And there's so many opportunities to do that. And there are so many digital resources out there that you can rely on or tap into. And of course, you do need to check multiple sources and make up your own mind at the end about how things work and who people are. But that not assuming is really important. You did mention the forum. What's that about? Tell us more about our forum. We've been working very hard behind the scenes. It's happening soon. What's going on?
Yes, I'm so excited to announce that we're doing the 6th iteration of our Vic Forum, and it's called Unmasking the Pandemic, CALD, COVID and Communication. A lot of work went into this behind the scenes from a lot of people at Polaris, and we're sponsoring it along with NAATI. And it's really great because it's a chance for us to really grapple with the pandemic and everything that's happened. It's giving us a chance to really look at how we approach communication. And I know for myself, communication has changed immensely since 2020. And, Zoom was not a thing I even thought about before, but suddenly it's my lifeline. I'm always on it. And even for me, it can be quite complicated maneuvering everything. So just imagine what it was like for the CALD communities in Victoria. And I think it's really great. I think it's important because it's giving us a chance to reflect on everything. And we're going to do it in a really fun way as well, I should mention. We have a lot of great speakers on board, and we'll also be having a debate, which has quite the controversial topic, which I'm quite excited for. But yeah, we've just got a whole lot of different initiatives, and it will be completely online. So no risk of catching COVID there. So in terms of what I can say about the actual forum, I would just encourage everyone to register online on eventbrite.com. And just keep an eye out on our Facebook page, because we're continuously updating with new information about speakers, about debates, about the different companies that are sponsoring us. We're so lucky to have a number of different sponsors who are willing to partner with us on this initiative. So yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. So with the forum and the debate that you've mentioned, we're going to be asking a very big and a very important question. What is it?
The question is, are pandemics good for us?
Okay. Yeah. I don't know whether pandemics are good for us. So hopefully the panel, the debaters will be able to give us some answers. Mm-hmm. I can tell you, though, that we've got nearly 300 people registered for this event. So we normally get about 100 and something attend, like face to face, and we struggled with, like, initially we wanted to do it face to face, then we like panic. So we ended up doing it. It's sort of like a hybrid event, really, because we're doing it with a TV station. So essentially, it'll be like our own Polaroid TV program. Wait for it. But we did want to ask some of the more difficult questions, because we're not really talking about what we're going to do about what we've learned, right? So I think what we're trying to promote through this event is to just stop and think, and okay, what are the lessons learned? So with the debate, do you think the pandemic's been good for us or not good for us personally?
Personally, I think it's that's quite a difficult question, because you don't say, I can't just openly say it was good for us knowing everything that happened, but I think it was good for us in the sense that it really gave us a chance to take a step back and appreciate the simpler things in life. I know for me personally, I got to spend more time with my family. I got to learn about more about them, and I think it's also created a lot of new opportunities for a lot of different people. And I think, especially with communication, it's increased communication in some ways, because before you wouldn't really consider jumping on Zoom to talk to someone else from across the world, but now it's not such a big deal. You know, everyone communicates through Zoom. You could be talking to your neighbor, or you could be talking to someone else in another country. And I think that's a really great resource that we've all tapped into. And I think with the forum, it'll be a great chance for us to really shape how we go about things in the future. And personally, I think the working from home situation has also been a great initiative as well for most people. Yeah,
so it just depends where you sit on that spectrum, but I think there's so many wonderful things about it that I think, on balance, for me, I think it's been a good thing just to rethink how we function as a society. Because what I often say is that one of the things that the pandemic has shown to me is how connected we are. So whether you I don't know, rich person living in an opulent castle, or somebody with less privilege, your health is equal, right? As in, how this is a difficult thing to say, but what I'm trying to say is that what happens in one part of the world can affect you very quickly, regardless of who you are as a person, right? That's what I'm trying to say.
I think the other day you used an analogy of I think someone living in Tanit and someone living in Turak. I think that was a really great analogy of, like, if they don't receive the same message and then they meet somewhere in the middle, it doesn't matter who had the better resources or who had the better opportunities. That person can still pass on COVID, let's say, to another person. And it's really important to understand that everyone's the same, and everyone needs access to the same information if we really want to make and bring about real change.
Right, because on the other hand, of course, we know, and this is, the statistics that you're so passionate and the data you're so passionate about tell us very clearly that people from disadvantaged, vulnerable backgrounds, those that do not speak English well, or poverty, or other issues are at stake, mental health, their health outcomes aren't as good as somebody living in Turak, let's face it, right? So when we talk about communication, that is our focus, really, right?
Yeah, we really just want to focus on just, just closing that gap really between everyone, and just making sure everyone feels they are understood and feels that they have the same access to everything, because we do at the end of the day, but sometimes barriers can kind of affect how we see that and how we feel like we have access. So I think it's really important to just make sure that you take the time to maybe focus on people who need it more than others. And unfortunately, CALD community members are the ones who need communication the most, in my opinion. Yeah.
Right. And it's really good, let me tell you, that's really good to be able to hear voices such as yours. And I think in many ways we've come a long way, and in many ways we haven't, because, sometimes the decision makers aren't you or me or people that really understand. And the decision made about communication can have such dire consequences if they aren't made correctly. Andrea, there in the background, do you have any questions for our wonderful Hazara?
Yes, we do have quite a few questions here regarding communication. Can you tell us, guys, why it seems so difficult to engage with multicultural communities when translating resources?
I can take this one. I have an opinion on this, sorry, I should say.
Go.
I would say it kind of comes down to the fact of maybe there's a bit of fear, I think, and a bit of mistrust sometimes. I think people understand that some people are trying to help them, but maybe in the past things haven't always gone the way it's supposed to, or things have been difficult in terms of trying to get to an understanding. And I think because of that, there's a bit of hesitation in reaching out. And yeah, sometimes I know personally with my parents, sometimes they're just very focused on assimilating that they don't want to bring attention to themselves, and they prefer just to go with the flow, even if it's at the expense of their understanding and their communication. So I think it's just really important to communicate that you're really just trying to understand and you're trying to be on the same page with whoever you're trying to communicate with.
Right. So people may, for example, I'm not saying this about your parents necessarily, but they may be embarrassed to admit that they haven't understood something, or they just don't want to make waves. They just want to get on with their lives and not really stand out, because they already stand out in many different ways. So I think that these are very good points. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. What would you recommend when approaching a community you don't know well and that it might have different beliefs?
I would say one of the easiest ways you can do it is maybe through a social activity. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of initiatives that are run by the Victorian government, by a lot of different communities. And I think maybe a festival or something like that is the best way just to understand the culture. And you don't even have to communicate with anyone. You can just be present. And I think you just take in a lot of the culture and a lot of the way that people communicate naturally. And it does differ between communities. So I think just really like immersing yourself in the culture is the best way to go about figuring out a way to approach them later on.
Yeah. And also asking yourself a question, who do I know that can give me information? Who do I know that I can ask? Where can I go? And, there are the ecosystem of, ethnic community services, ethno-specific communication organizations, and also community leaders is quite extensive there. You just need to make an effort, really. You just need to sort of think, okay, I want to communicate with whoever. Who do I know? Who can I ask? Where do I go? And of course, we want everybody to come to Polaron, but the reality of it is that there are lots of different pathways and lots of different resources. It is just a matter of wanting, to really do it on at a genuine level, I think.
Thank you, ladies. So, Hazara, you mentioned before that being proactive is essential, but it seems like such a difficult task since everything is being done in a rush when delivering a translated message. Is there anything that can be done to avoid rushing things and get translations right?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to that first tip I mentioned, just preparing in advance. So before you even are thinking about translation, have a look at the text and see what can I do beforehand to ensure that when it does come to the translation step, everything can go as smoothly as it can be, And I think it just really comes down to preparation and research, and just have a look at what's worked for you in the past and what hasn't, and maybe look at case studies as well and what works for other organizations. And of course, we're here as well, so we have a very good understanding of how things work and how things don't work. So it's really about just doing your research and figuring out what your priorities are and how you can go about ensuring that when it does come to translation, everything's ready to go and you don't have to rush and you can work around your schedule and your deadlines.
Hey, Sarah, I know that your parents prefer to see things on paper, but do show them this video, because I think they'll be immensely proud of you. And we certainly love working with you and your perspective and your energy and how you explain things, because there's so much clarity and order in how you just said what you've said, that hopefully people can be inspired by what you've just said, and really just think about, what do I do? How do I do it? Keep it simple. Take little steps, and if you have any questions, come and ask us. We've got about 2 minutes, and I did want to sort of dedicate them to the forum, which you mentioned. Can you just tell us when it's happening? How do people find more information? And once again, what it's about, just briefly.
Yeah, so our forum will be held on the 31st of March, and it'll be completely online, so you can join it'll be on our YouTube channel, I should mention. Yes. And I should also announce that we actually have quite a few great speakers that will be on board. So we are happy to announce that Dr. Brett Sutton will be our keynote speaker, which we're very excited for. We'll also have a Member of Parliament, Sheena Watts, who is the first Aboriginal MP to join Parliament. So I'm very excited to hear her opinion on things. She will be representing the multicultural Affairs Ministry. And then we'll also be having Vivian Nguyen from the Victorian Multicultural Commission. And there'll be a lot more speakers as well, especially when it comes to the debate. We have quite a few interesting people lined up for everyone. And in terms of what else I need to mention, make sure to register online beforehand. And if you're worried about missing the event, don't stress, because it will be recorded and it will be available to watch anytime. So yeah, and if you have any questions, you can reach me or Eva online or through our email addresses and phone numbers. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing. And I should also mention just very quickly that we will be having musical performance, yes. But the highlight by far is the video, is the film that we're making this afternoon. So watch that space because we are going crazy. Anybody from the team that's ever wanted to be famous is going to be there acting out all kinds of things. So we will show it to you on the 31st of March, and we're going to show you how to do translation well, right?
That's the aim of the video. I'm very excited for it. I think it'll be quite interesting.
Right, we've given you a very prominent role, so do well. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really, really appreciate it. I certainly have gained a bit more clarity about how to explain things, because for me the issue is that I'm one of those people that knows too much. And it's hard for me to sometimes.
It's full of knowledge, cheers.
Right. Not to get excited and just give people lectures. You, however, Hazara, have a very quiet and structured way of explaining things. So for that, I thank you. And thank you, Andrea, and also Stephanie there behind the scenes, and Hazara, to you and your wonderful parents who gave you to Polaron. Rented you out, right? Whatever.
Yes, happy to be here.
I'll move on. I'll stop now before I go into uncharted territories. Thank you very, very much, and we'll see everybody later.